I do remember on the flight down, it was a 22-hour flight, I think, something like that. And it was a 9-seat plane. It was a huge plane. And I was literally right in the middle of it, the middle seat. And I just remember it was nighttime and we were flying, and I just perceived this light out of the corner of my eye. And I don't know why, I always remember this. It was just such a really unique experience. But I just remember looking, what is that light? Where is that coming from? And I looked out, somebody had their little window shutter pushed up, and just out there was just the full moon, just shining right through, and just hitting me on the face. And there, like I said, there was nothing spiritual or uplifting or anything like that. It was just, I was how many thousands of feet in the air, and then just there, the moon in all its glory was just shining right through, just right on my face as I'm stuck right in the middle of this huge airplane flying down to Brazil on my mission. It was a fun experience. But I do remember flying into Brazil. I kind of had this really naive concept that I'd be kind of hacking my way through the bush to teach people in loincloths and whatnot. But as we were flying in, I had to fly into Sao Paulo first before we flew into my mission. And we were flying and just gliding over the city of Sao Paulo. And I was just like, how big is this city? It was just huge. And we just flew and glided and glided and glided for the longest time, it seemed like, until we finally landed. I'm like, wow, okay, this is clearly not what I thought it was. And Belo Horizonte, which was the mission I was in, was not much smaller. It was just a huge city. So that really took me by surprise, and I was really, it was a little bit more of a culture shock that way. But it was fun. It was fun being able to see it in that way. When we got there, the mission president, now I had my mission president for the full 3 years, or for the full 2 years that I was there. He had just gotten there like 6-7 months previous to that, and I left with him still as my mission president. He was a police officer, so he was very firm, he was very strict, and I went down with 2 other elders, and we were sitting in the office, and he was telling us, we were walking us through the papers, we needed to fill them out and do all that stuff, and he told us that you need to sign this paper exactly the way it appears on your passport. And when he's saying exactly and emphasizing it, we're just sitting there and I'm like, does he mean exactly like curve for curve? I'm just and we were hectic because we were like about a week and a half behind schedule. So we had thrown off the entire transfer because of visa issues. So it was really hectic in the office. He was really stressed out and he was just running back and forth. And so I, went through the clarification and he was like, exactly as it appears. I'm like, all right, whatever. So I did the best I could to sign it exactly. It was kind of intimidating. First introduction to the mission president. But I grew to love him. He was a wonderful mission president, and just a great man. I really grew to love him. So then they sent us out to. We were going to open. I was going to be the companion of the district leader. We were going to go out with 2 sisters, and we were going to open a brand new area. Previous in the history of the mission, the missionaries were intended to go to this area, but they got off a city too early, and then the work just kind of took off from there. So they never actually quite made it to where they were supposed to go. So my companion and I and these 2 sisters were going to go out there, and we were going to open this new area. And but so we didn't have an apartment yet. And by way of culture, I went in there. I was doing just fine. So we had we ended up crashing with a group of 4 elders in their apartment. So there were 6 of us there until my companion and I could find a place to rent. And so there were no rooms, there was no bed. We just slept on blankets out on a patio. And I remember my first night sleeping there. I was having a difficult time falling asleep. It's kind of warm. But I was kind of feeling a little uncomfortable. I started to drift off. But then, kind of like in the movies when they're lost in the woods or something like that, and in the background you can hear the wolves howling, and it kind of keeps them up and kind of keeps them panicked. I just remember relating that to my experience because that first night there were roosters crowing all night long. I'm like, what? Stupid Brazilian roosters, what are they doing? They have no idea when they're supposed to crow. They're crowing at all hours of the night, and I'm just like, oh, they're going to be like this massive flock of roosters that are going to come over, and they're just going to swoop down on us and peck our eyes out or something like that. So my first night was a little bumpy, it was a little rough, but it was a really fun experience as I look back on it. And we eventually found a place in the city where we were, and great little place, just a little apartment behind this lady's house, and she prepared food for us and everything. But there was another experience that it was really a good experience for me. There was an elder there. He had kind of a darker complexion, so Brazilians kind of have a Portuguese mix with them, so they kind of have a darker skin. It's just slightly darker. And so this guy, I came in and he spoke Portuguese all the time. I never heard him speak English. And he would read the Brazilian newspapers, and he just was always speaking Portuguese. And I remember I was having a particularly difficult day. I was, trying to make the transition, not understanding the language, and I was having a really difficult time. And so I just remember we were in the apartment one time, and I was just kind of sitting there. I don't even remember what I was doing. But this elder, who I did not know was American at this point, transitioned to English. And from what I understood, he never spoke English. He always spoke Portuguese. He kind of prided himself on the idea that he could speak actually better and more accurate than most Brazilians. So he was a funny guy. He was a great guy, though, Elder Holt. And he could tell I was struggling a little bit, and he transitioned to English for probably about between 5 and 10 minutes while he and I conversed and just talked a little bit. And in that situation, it was a huge relief and just brought me a great deal of comfort. My actual companion was American. He spoke English all the time. But there was just something about that moment that just took on a lot of meaning for me as he transitioned to English. And then we had this little interaction, this little conversation, and he transitioned to Portuguese, and I don't think I ever heard him speak English again. And it was just for those few minutes. And that was, like I say, just that really had an impact on me and really meant a lot to me at that time when I was just kind of struggling with transitioning to the Brazilian culture. And I think it was kind of an uplift that just kind of changed things after that. And I was fine for the rest of my mission. So that's kind of my trip down. Those are some major things that I remember standing out to me that I've always reminisced on as I look through my pictures. Just some good memories, make me laugh, but also ones that, took on meaning for me. I went out in 1994. So at the time there was an East and West, the state. So Brazil is divided up into states, kind of like the United States. They're the United States of Brazil. And Belo Horizonte is the capital. Minas Gerais, General Mines, I believe is what that means, is the name of the state that I was serving, and the capital is Belo Horizonte. And it was divided into two missions, East and West. And at the time, there was only one temple, if I'm not mistaken. There might have been one in the way north. But I know there was the one temple in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and people would bus for a week at a time to get down there. And that was it. It was outside of our mission district, so we were never able to attend at the time. But in Minas Gerais, now Brazil itself is a very Catholic country. But Minas Gerais, the way I understood it at the time, and probably even today, is that it was almost like the capital of Catholicism in Brazil. It was just the most staunch, the most traditional Catholic state out of all of them. And the capital of Brazil actually was in Minas Gerais at one point before it had moved to where it currently is. And in that city, they're just cathedrals, as often as you see in Utah, a chapel, and they were everywhere. And it's gorgeous, gorgeous little city, but very, very Catholic. So at the time, we were teaching from the discussion booklets. We had 6 distinct discussion booklets. They were memorized, and typically you would almost breeze through the first half of the first discussion because everybody had some belief, some foundation in God, and believed in them to some degree. So we, usually would just jump straight to the first vision and Joseph Smith's bit. It did make it a little bit difficult. I believe ours was one of the lowest baptizing missions because of that tradition. And their idea was if they could increase the work and increase the number of converts in Minas Gerais, it could have an influence and kind of trickle out to the rest of the nation. And so there was a lot of emphasis on the work in Minas Gerais to kind of get that work rolling. But for the 2 years that I was there, we were, I believe, one of the lowest baptizing missions. Still a few hundred per month, a couple hundred, I think, because I think a few hundred was the pretty average for Brazil. But we were down in like the 200 range, just maybe under 200. And so that was kind of the feel for that. It did make the work a little bit difficult. It made it easy to talk to these people about religion and about God. It was very easy. The people there were super friendly and always ready, willing, and eager to talk about life and about the meaning of life and things like that. But it did make it difficult to transition to changing those religions, because it did come out of a really staunch kind of traditional Catholicism. We had one young couple, beautiful young couple. We loved teaching them. I would say my testimony grew a fair amount in teaching them. The Spirit was just really, really strong as we taught this couple. Probably one of the strongest experiences as we taught them. And we went through all 6 discussions, and then we got to the end, and we said, "Will you be baptized?" And we had already asked them several times, "Will you be baptized?" They said, "No, we've already been baptized." We were kind of confused, so we went back and we went through and reviewed all the major points throughout all the discussions. Do you believe Joseph Smith? Do you believe the prophets on the earth? Do you believe the priesthood was the authority? Blah, 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 so on and so forth. And they agreed and said yes to all of it. And we said, "So will you be baptized?" And their response was, "No, we've already been baptized into the Catholic Church." So there was something that was missed there. But... and so we're like, well, okay, I guess that's it. So we moved on, but it was that kind of a mentality, very staunch. It's tradition. That's what we've done. I wouldn't want to leave my family's religion for anything. So that did make it a little bit difficult. Climate-wise, obviously it was pretty humid, but it wasn't super humid. It wasn't so humid. During the rainy season, it was. So we had a pretty mild climate. It wasn't like the rainforesty, jungly place like you'd think in the Amazon, like you would imagine in Brazil. There was even one city that we lived in where they had all left for Carnival, and where we were was really close to the beach. The beach was outside our mission, but it was really close, so they all bussed out to the beach. And it was just classic. We were walking down the street, nobody was in the street, just me and my companion, and just tumbleweed blowing across the street. I mean, you couldn't. It was the most abandoned town. It was just classic. And then to have the tumbleweed just kind of reinforce that. It was really funny to watch. But in the capital, in Belo Horizonte, there were wards. You did have several wards. You had stakes, obviously. As we got out into the further cities, I served mainly in branches. You'd usually have 1, maybe 2 branches in the cities that I served in. There was one small town that was quite busy, quite active, and had 4 branches and actually had a chapel built. In most cases, I think outside, in most of the cities that I served in, if not all of them, except for that one, we were meeting in room spaces above stores, or in just little roadside, shacks, things like that. So nothing major, small little branches. Attendance could vary a lot. In fact, the extreme north city was one where they had the 4 branches, wonderful members of the church up there. But in the extreme south, they had an experience with missionaries, and it had completely depleted. There were probably about 20 people who attended on a regular basis in that city. So it varied a lot. When you went, like I said, when you were in close to Belo Horizonte, you would have the chapels, and you'd have regular attendance, and you'd have 100 to 150, up to 200 people attending. But for the most part, I was in branches with low attendance, and a lot of work to do, a lot of reactivity as well, a lot of reactivity. At the time, like I said, we were doing memorized discussions. When I heard about Preach My Gospel coming out, I loved the idea of it. Having a memorized routine, I felt, for my personality, kind of restricted me a little bit more in relaxing and really engaging in conversation with these people and getting to know them. In my life now, as I'm thinking about when I interact with people who think differently, which is nearly everybody, right? My own children, members of my own ward, I feel like one of the things that I feel is important is to really just take the time to listen to them and hear them. Hear where they're coming from, hear what their experiences are. Don't be so hung up on the idea of getting in there and teaching the discussion. I realize that's the missionaries' kind of main focus, but really getting to know them and hearing what they have to say, because it can help customize the discussions. And, and like I say, with the memorized portion of it, I feel like that made it difficult for me, because I had this bit that I had to get taken care of to be able to make sure that they were ready to be interviewed for baptism, and not really making sure that they were understanding the principles of the gospel, especially as it related to them and their life's experience and the things that they had gone through. So that for me is probably what I would do differently, is I would take more time to listen, and not just to them, but to what the Spirit is would be telling me about their experience and what piece of the gospel they needed to be hearing at that time. That was probably what I would do a little bit differently. I served from 1995, January is when I arrived, because at the time we went to the Provo MTC. Shortly after that, they opened up an MTC in Sao Paulo, and they just started shipping the missionaries straight to Brazil. So I was 2 months in the Provo MTC before I went down. So in January of 95 to December of 96 is when I served. And I started in a suburb of Belo Horizonte called São Benedito. And that was the one that we had, Santa Luzia was the name of the city. And that was the one that we had opened up. After that, I served in the city which was farthest north, the hottest, and the one that had the actual building and 4 branches in Nanuque. And then after that, I moved back down to a city called Governador Valadares, which was an interesting city because I think they said the ratio of women to men was 7-1, because so many men left the city to America to work and earn money and save money and eventually hopefully bring their families. So there were a lot of men that left. There were a lot of women in that city. But then it was interesting because I was called back to Nanuque for another several months. So I served in that city twice, which I didn't complain about. I loved serving in that city. It was a wonderful town. And then after that, I moved back down to a suburb just right outside Belo Horizonte, which was called, I don't remember the name of that town. But that was an interesting one. That was a fun city to serve in. And then from there, I went down to a city called Barbacena, which was where they had the the difficult work, where the missionaries had kind of disturbed things a little bit previous to that. So served in that one, and that was my last area. And then I left Brazil from there, from that area. So Barbacena was the one. That was an interesting town. It was the furthest south in our mission, and that one had been, like I mentioned, affected by previous missionaries who had gone swimming with a bunch of the members of the church. It had been a little inappropriate, and it really complicated things, especially with reactivation. It was very, very difficult. That town also had a handful of hospitals for what they would call the insane asylum, just for mental health issues. For some reason there was a large concentration of those hospitals in this city, which was kind of interesting in and of itself. The thing that I remember about this town was that we lived in an apartment with a little old lady who, and for some reason this was approved, we actually just were in one bedroom in her house. But she wore dentures, and so at night she would walk around the house without her dentures, and she would just it was really cute. It was in that house that they had the 1996 Summer Olympics, and we were permitted to stay up and watch. And with the time zone difference, at the time, we were up until about 3 o'clock in the morning waiting for America in Brazil for America, the United States of America, to come out and do their little march at the opening ceremonies of the Olympics. So we were able to stay up for that, and this little lady allowed us to kind of intrude on her space while we watched the Olympics. She was wonderful. She had a washer and a dryer, and didn't have that the entire mission. You're washing your clothes by hand the whole time. And the fuse blew out as we were wanting to use the washing machine for the first time. And for whatever reason, she was concerned about something and she refused to replace the fuse. So I had a washing machine there and I had to wash by hand for the rest of my mission. So that was a real letdown, but I was so excited to use the washing machine. But her house was right across the street from the padaria, which is just a bakery. And that was one of the things that I love about Brazil. You could walk into a bakery and they had all sorts of breads. And of course, we would wake up in the morning and that smell would just waft right through her house. It was such a delicious, yummy smell. I absolutely loved living there with her. And she was really sweet. She bought me a handcrafted blanket that I brought home, and we still use it to this day actively. It's just a fun little thing that she got, and she wanted to pose in it, so I could remember her. So she wrapped it around her shoulders, and she kind of did this little pose and got a picture of her. Dona Leite was her name. But that was one thing that I really, really loved about living in that area. We did have like I mentioned, there was one sister in the ward. She was the Relief Society president. She was a little bit older, sister as well. But she was a woman who we visited a few times, and I fell in love with her because she reminded me so much of my mom. So as I'm getting close to the end of my mission, it was just really nice having this lady there that reminded me so much of home. It didn't get me the least bit chunky. I loved being in Brazil. I was looking forward to going home, but I loved being in Brazil. And so it was just really neat to get to know this lady. And her mannerisms even reminded me a bit of my mother. But it was in this town that we had probably one of our strongest converts out of all the people that I taught and were baptized. We were, you get out there, you clap on the doors, you don't knock. And this girl comes out. She's wearing this see-through white shirt, and she just has her stuff on underneath, and that's it. I mean, you can see right through, and we're like, hi, would you like to hear the gospel? No, okay, well, we'll just move on to the next door. A little uncomfortable, but a lady from inside said, hey, tell them to come in. And she hadn't even looked up out the window. She had no idea who we were. So this girl kind of wraps herself up a little bit, and we walk in, and she wanders off in the back, thank goodness, and we meet this lady called Alexandra. Had her little daughter there. She lived with her husband, Paulo. And we started teaching her. She wanted to hear the discussions. So we started teaching her. She was amazing. She was one of those ones that had a dream and had really powerful experiences with the Book of Mormon just the whole way through. I don't know how else to explain it. She just had really strong experiences. And she decided not to wait for her husband, but she went ahead and was baptized. And we visited her. She was a military police in Brazil. There's a mandatory, I think to a degree, mandatory military police service. And she was actually serving as a military police at the time. So she was baptized, joined the church, and I communicated with her, and then I left and went home and wrote her a couple of times. And she wrote back a couple times saying that she was preparing to receive her patriarchal blessing, which is really exciting. Shortly thereafter, I received another letter from her saying that she had been called to serve as a Relief Society president. And then shortly thereafter, she was preparing herself to go to the temple. And then the last letter I received in Sao Paulo, she would have busted down. And then the last letter I received from her was that she had been preparing herself to go the second time to the temple. But at the time, her husband had still not joined the church. Good man, great man. We really loved teaching him as well. But that was a great experience for me as well. And like I say, one of our strongest investigators and converts. I've looked her up on Facebook several times, and I work with a Brazilian right now, and he's tried to help me try and track her down. I realize I'm looking for the wrong age. This woman was in her late 20s when we taught her, and that's not who I was looking for. I was even maybe I'd see her daughter, but her daughter was 1.5 years old. when we taught. So I'm thinking she's probably married and has children of her own. So tried to track her down, haven't been able to find her since then, but would love to connect with her again and see where she is in life. But that was a really neat experience with her. Really loved teaching her. So we could probably start with Nanuki, which is the one I served in twice. That city geographically was furthest north in the mission. Minas Gerais still went a fair bit north of that, but it was the furthest north in the mission. And was in a bowl, basically. There was a huge rock. It was actually more like the one major portion was almost more like a jello mold. There was a huge rock in the middle of it. There was a river that went down, kind of curved around the base of it, and then the city was built up on the rock, across the river, and then kind of up the other side as well. And that one was furthest north, so it was the hottest of the cities that I served in. But there was wind to cool it down, and I say that because Governador Valadares, I can mention that one as well. That one was probably the hottest city, and I'll explain why. But that one was Nanuki was a fun city. Like I said, there was a good mixture of, I guess you could say, rich and poor. They had a couple areas where people, rich for those standards down there. They had slightly nicer homes, nicely finished and things like that. There were a couple of cities. There was this one road that just went straight back. It was one road, and it went for, I don't know how long it went. But it was just shacks, cardboard homes. It was interesting because it almost didn't seem to matter how poor a family was, they would have a TV in their house. And so when we would walk into some of these homes that just had sticks, literally sticks and mud and cardboard and just metal roofs, they would have a TV in their house, and so they could keep up on all the Brazilian novellas, which are kind of like the soap operas. Everybody watched those. I even got caught up on a couple of them. It was kind of funny, but that one was interesting too. I always thought it was funny the way they had it situated. Is that way upstream they had a slaughterhouse where they would slaughter pigs. They would clean everything out in the river and get it all cleaned up and ready for sale. Then a little bit further downstream, there was like a pool area where kids would jump off and they would swim and, do whatever they do in rivers. And then all the way down at the bottom, they had a complete bag all the way down at the bottom. They had all the women down there washing clothing in the river, and I'm like, so it's kind of gross when you stop and thought about it. We did have a sister to wash our clothes, but she would use a machine there at her house. But that one was, like I say, that was an interesting city. Come carnival time and major celebrations, because it was only an hour away from the beach in the next mission over, and so people would just clean out, and they would just move straight out to go out to the beaches and leave it pretty much empty. So in a lot of missions, like in Rio, where some of those missions, the missionaries would have to hunker down for a week and a half while they did all their partying, there was nothing going on in our town. So there was no real need for us to really hide, I guess, from Carnival. But that was some of those details about that city. In that city, we had one really good report about the churches and missionaries went out and served in a park. There was an article that was produced saying the missionaries, their actions speak louder than their words. And that was a real good publicity for the church at the time. It just opened people up, and it just made people more open. Said these are good people who are really trying to serve the community, So that was a good experience, a good memory for that one. There was just one experience we had there with the power of the priesthood, which was really strengthened my witness that the priesthood is a real thing, and tangible power. We were teaching this woman who we had to take the bus to get out to her place, and we were teaching her at the time, and she wanted to be baptized, but she was living with a man who was not her husband, but he was an invalid. She was just basically taking care of him. He laid in the bed all day long. He couldn't sit up, couldn't speak, couldn't do anything like that. And we were in there and we were talking to her. Says, do you want to be baptized? And she said, I want to be baptized, but I'm afraid to leave him because of the state that he's in. And so we asked if she would like us to give him a priesthood blessing of health, which she consented to. And So we laid our hands on his head, gave him a blessing, and the blessing included included him being able to improve in his health so that she could move forward in her spiritual and gospel progression, right? Move forward with that. And that if he didn't have the opportunity in this life, that he would receive the opportunity afterwards. So we gave him that blessing, and then we left and came back to pick her up just to see where she was the morning of the baptism. And when we got there, he was sitting up, which he hadn't done in months. But he was sitting up, he was communicating, he looked really well, and gave her the confidence that she needed to go forward. And she was baptized that day. It was a really spiritual experience, very uplifting and very moving, her baptismal service. Dropped, and then, she was done, carried on with business, then she came home. And we went back to visit her the next day after church, because she wasn't at church. We went, I don't know what's going on. And we went back the next day after church to visit her, and he had passed away. And it was like, well, that's, it was just amazing the way he was able to be up and about. But she had the post-missionary discussions, and they discussed a little bit more in detail about the temple and vicarious work for the dead. And I left on my mission. I left the area. She had just moved on, was continuing to come to church and continued to be active. But I had heard after I had left the mission that she had been preparing to go to the temple and to take his name to the temple and have his work done for him. So it was just really neat to see the priesthood bless in that way and have it so visibly, tangibly fulfilled, and which allowed this woman and this man to move forward in the gospel. And it was really an experience. But that did happen in Nanuki, and it was the second visit, so it was good that the first visit wasn't my last one. So that was a really neat experience. I loved that for that reason. So there was the one in Gobernador Valadares, which I mentioned was hotter than Nanuki, but the main reason it was hottest was because of a huge mountain. It's a rock. I mean, I wouldn't call it a mountain by comparison to Utah, but it was a mountain. It's a huge rock, had really strong winds, but the winds usually came from the backside of the mountain, and so we didn't get a lot of wind in that city. And the sun would just bake that rock all day long, and then at night it wouldn't cool down, and it would just radiate heat into this city all night long. So it was just always hot and muggy. But the unique thing about that mountain was that it was for hang gliders and parasailers. It was apparently what they say is world renowned. They had people come from all over when they would come to visit Brazil, they would go to that rock. They would go to that mountain to do their hang gliding because the winds were so good. And we did hike it one time, and they had all these ramps for people to launch off of. But that one was, you could visit more people from out of state than you could in any of the other cities that I ever served in. So that was kind of a fun, unique detail about that city. That was probably the major thing about that one. That one was a really fun city as well. I'll be honest with you, I don't remember the details. All the details of why. That one had a little, I don't know if you've ever been to Kentucky. They have kind of like a central downtown area, and then all the streets spoke out from there. And they didn't have a chapel. Theirs was a little branch, met in a little side thing. But did have a river that split it right through the middle, and as well. But this one was a little bit more well maintained than the one in Nanuki, so it was a little bit cleaner river. I think that was the city where somebody served me a piranha for meal. It was a piranha that was about this big, and it had the teeth. They just cooked the whole thing, fish, eyes, teeth, and everything. But teeny little teeth. But that's where I actually got to eat some piranha. The only one main experience that I remember there was we baptized an entire family. We bumped into a son, and their whole family ended up being baptized. But we got to go help them build a house. Their houses down there are built out of this clay. This red clay everywhere. I don't know how they build skyscrapers out of them, because if you just stand on it and kind of wiggle back and forth, you can actually grind these things to the ground. But we actually got to go and help them pour cement for a roof. So these missionaries that are not used to hard physical labor, I mean, we're lugging these buckets of concrete up and down these stairs for this ceiling area. And that's the way they would build their homes, out of these red bricks. No wood, because termites were too much of a thing, plus the moisture, and they couldn't seal them the way we do here. So it just corroded way too fast. And so everything was out of this red clay bricks and cement floors, cement roofs. Well, cement floors, and then usually everything was kind of metal, corrugated metal roofs. Which does remind me that in that city, we were in this building. We were meeting in this one, and they had a metal roof, and we had some investigators there that one day, and it was raining, and you can't hear anything. Once the rain starts to hit, and the way it rains in Brazil, just downpours, just rains, and it's just so loud on those metal roofs. Really, really difficult to hear. But another little tidbit about Governador Valadares was just one that I really loved a lot. Learning to listen to what people are saying, and hearing what they're saying, and not just their words, but hearing the feeling and the emotion of what they're saying. I would say something I try. A deluge of rain. It was literally buckets, and the streets just filled with water. Really strong lightning bolts, but very, very strong rain you'd never see here in Utah. I do not recall any wildlife. Maybe a spider, just out there in the thing, but I did not meet any wildlife, no. Crazy chickens, and that was about it. The craziest experience I had was probably a toss-up between eating an ant about yay big, they just fell out of the sky, or seriously eating blood. Was probably the craziest thing I did while I was down there. When I came down, we went to lunch on that first day out, and a native Brazilian asked me if I wanted more, but the way they cut off the R's at the end of the words, I thought she was I could not tell what she was asking me, do you want more? Quer mais? And I thought she was saying que mais. I'm like, that more? What more? I had no idea what she was asking me, and all she was asking me was, do you want more? I couldn't figure it out because of her accent. That was the worst thing I ever experienced. I just like, what did she say? The hardest experience I encountered was pride in somebody not understanding my Portuguese after I'd been there for about a year and a half. And they were basically testing us, and they said, we received our answer, we're good. And so we left, and we never went back and taught them. And that was a hard lesson. That was a hard, hard lesson to learn. And I learned, swallow your pride. If they can't understand you, let your companion do the talking, because he's native, let him do the talking. It's more important that they understand the gospel. That was the hardest thing for me to learn. My favorite food was the freshly squozen juices. They're fresh fruit. They're not something that's been sitting in the store. They go out there and they pick it off the tree, they squish it into a juice, and I miss that so much. They were just absolutely delicious. I would say my best mission advice was know the Book of Mormon. Not just know what's in it, but know that it's true, and that it's the tool the Lord has used to convert the nations. That's, I would say, study your Book of Mormon. Make sure you understand it, make sure you know it, and what the passages mean and how to use it as a spiritual tool. They are ready to talk. They were a laid-back people. They were ready to talk about life's experiences, and I loved just getting in there, no concern about talking to these people. The ones who let you in, they would just open their lives up, and you could just get to know them so easily. I loved getting to know the Brazilians. Just wonderful people. Wonderful, wonderful people. I never wore a suit. I know you have to wear a suit for like zone conferences, but that was it. I took short sleeve shirts, and I wore cotton garments because they would absorb the moisture better than the sticky stuff. And then when there was a breeze, it felt really, really good. But I just pack light because it's hot and you won't wear your suit that often. So congratulations on your call to serving in the Belo Horizonte mission. I served in the Belo Horizonte mission myself about 20 years ago. It is 2016 now, and I just want to congratulate you on it, and just want to let you know that you are going to serve a phenomenal, wonderful group of people in the world. They have a great love for God. There are a lot of Catholics down there. They have a great love for God. You're not going to have any difficulty conversing with these people about religion and things like that. So if you have any fears about that or the language, don't worry about that. They are very wonderful people, very accommodating and very forgiving of mistakes. But I would just say one thing: if you're, as you're preparing to go down to meet these people, just go down with that idea in mind, that these people really are just very open. They're very loving. They're very giving, and you're going to have a wonderful time teaching them the gospel. I had some very unique experiences down there, visiting with these people, and some really experiences that strengthened my own testimony, my own witness. And so I'm super excited for you, and I just want to bear my testimony to you that what you're getting prepared to go do is accurate and is right, and is going to bless the lives of these people. You will encounter poverty that you probably haven't ever encountered here, and you're going to see a people that are very open and ready. 20 years ago, that's where they were. So I'm really grateful for the opportunity that I had to serve there, to visit with them, and to love those people with all my heart. I would love to go back and meet some of those people that I taught. So congratulations and good luck, and God bless you as you serve these people.